The help? Is that what you call yourself now, Volkov? Because the requisition form clearly states maintenance specialist, yet you're asking for industrial-grade bleach like you're scrubbing a latrine in the mess hall. I swear the standards on this base drop further every time I see that mop of yours. Sergeant Sterling, a man whose uniform creases were sharper than his operational knowledge, leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the pale fluorescence of the supply depot glinting off the polished brass nameplate on his desk. He hadn't even looked up from his quarterly inventory report, a document he clearly valued more than the humans standing before him. Volkov didn't flinch. Her corporal rank was barely visible beneath the grime of a 10-hour shift dedicated to sterilizing the base's most sensitive server rooms, a job she performed with silent, methodical perfection. Her utility uniform was faded, smelling faintly of cleaning solvent and exhaust fumes, a stark contrast to Sterling's crisp, sterile office. "Sergeant," Volkov replied, her voice flat, betraying none of the deep, simmering exhaustion that clung to her, like the humidity of the July air. "The South Wing operating theaters require sterilization grade D. The standard issue cleaner is not certified for prions or viral load reduction. I need the concentrated quaternary ammonium compound, and I need 3 liters. The log is signed by Dr. Alston." Sterling finally sighed, a sound engineered for maximum condescension. He pushed his chair back, the movement theatrical and slow. He adjusted the pristine digital watch on his wrist, a luxury item that screamed desk jockey. "Dr. Alston also signs off on his own coffee refills, Corporal. We are a forward operating base. We do not stock chemicals that could strip paint off a battleship just so you can make the floor sparkle. Frankly, Volkov, your obsession with cleanliness is beginning to border on the pathological. Just use the standard floor soap and move on. You're holding up my schedule." He used the phrase, "move on," as if she were a minor inconvenience, a buzzing insect disrupting the important rhythm of his day. Volkov merely nodded, her eyes fixed on a point just above his head. She knew this game. Sterling thrived on asserting dominance over the non-combat roles, especially those who handled the dirty, thankless jobs. He saw the mop in her hand and the oil smudge on her cheek as confirmation of her insignificance. He saw her silence as weakness. He was dangerously, fundamentally wrong. That silence was a mask. It was the absolute, impenetrable shield she had painstakingly constructed over the past 2 years, a necessary layer of concrete over a foundation built on high explosive trauma. Sterling knew her name, but he didn't know the designation it carried. Corporal Anya Volkov, the quiet cleaner, the person whose greatest current stressor seemed to be insufficient cleaning supplies. The truth was locked away, compartmentalized deep in the archives of her past service. It wasn't the kind of secret you shared at morning muster. It was the kind of secret that woke you up screaming, covered in sweat, tasting dust and copper. Volkov turned to leave, accepting the inferior cleaning agent just to end the exchange, when Sterling added the final, unnecessary barb, his voice dropping slightly, laced with malice. "Really, Volkov, stop wasting the Army's time. If you can't handle basic maintenance, maybe you should transfer back to your old unit. Oh wait, they fired the quiet nurse, didn't they? Too sensitive for the real fight. Now run along. The real soldiers need the hallway clear." The word nurse hit her like a physical blow. Sterling knew about her medical training, the brief, intense time she spent as a field medic before her transfer, and he was weaponizing it. He believed she failed. He believed she retreated. She didn't react externally, but internally the concrete cracked. The memory flooded back, immediate and sharp, transporting her 6,000 miles east, past the oppressive humidity of this stateside base, back to the blinding, sun-scorched dust of a place the military had once called Fob Chapman. Fob Chapman was not a base. It was an anchor point carved out of relentless, unforgiving desert. It was 200 acres of misery surrounded by triple-strand concertina wire, baking under a merciless sun that never seemed to set. For Corporal Volkov, then a 22-year-old medic attached to a reconnaissance unit, Chapman represented the end of innocence and the beginning of a relentless operational brutality she had never prepared for in medical school. Her role was often split: primary care for the localized indigenous population outside the wire, and trauma stabilization for the recon teams inside. The latter was far more common than any briefing suggested. The day it happened, the day that shattered her life and earned her the transfer to the supply depot floor, was etched onto her soul, not as a date, but as a sequence of agonizing sensory details: the smell of diesel and dry earth, the relentless, high-pitched whine of the portable generators, the metallic taste of adrenaline. They were providing overwatch for a clearance operation deep in the Pech Valley, territory the command structure still referred to, with grim euphemism, as contested. Volkov wasn't supposed to be on the rooftop that day. She was grounded, treating a severe dehydration case. But Staff Sergeant Miller, their designated sniper, had come down with a debilitating gastrointestinal issue hours before the mission start. Command was clear. The team needed the deterrent. They needed the long reach. Volkov had trained extensively on heavy weapons systems, not as a primary MOS, but as essential cross-training. She was small, but she possessed an uncanny, almost unnatural stillness, and an instinctual understanding of ballistics, gifts inherited from a childhood spent hunting in the Siberian wilderness before her family emigrated. She was handed the tool of ultimate violence, the Barrett M107A1. The Barrett was not a rifle. It was a mobile artillery piece masquerading as an anti-materiel system. It weighed nearly 30 pounds unloaded, its recoil buffer system a marvel of engineering designed to absorb the monstrous kick of the 50 BMG round. Volkov had dragged the colossal weapon onto the highest rooftop of the abandoned factory overlooking the valley choke point, settling into the familiar cold embrace of the prone position. The sun beat down, turning the metal surface of the roof into a griddle. She lay there, her heart rate steady at 55 beats per minute, monitoring the radio traffic while meticulously checking her data: range, altitude, air pressure, and most critically, the calculation for the Coriolis effect, at the extreme distances required for effective suppression, often exceeding 1,800 meters in that valley. The rotation of the Earth exerted a measurable, non-negotiable force on the projectile. A 50 caliber round fired west would drift negligibly south. Fired north, it would drift right. Ignore it, and you missed by feet. Volkov had drilled this calculation until it was muscle memory, integrating it with the Kestrel weather meter readings and feeding the data into her scope's display. Every shot was a high-stakes physics problem. For 6 hours, the valley floor was quiet, a deceivingly peaceful ribbon of scrub and dry riverbed where the recon team moved with agonizing slowness. Volkov felt the tension in her jaw, the sweat stinging her eyes, but she did not move. Then, the static burst into chaos. Contact! Contact! RPG! We're pinned! 6-man element, heavy machine guns, 150 meters out, low ground, the dry creek bed. The air instantly thickened with the crackle of automatic fire. Volkov pulled the massive bolt of the M107A1 back, feeding the colossal cartridge into the chamber. Her hands, trained to be gentle when setting an IV or stopping arterial bleed, were now steady, absolute instruments of destruction. "Volkov, fire solution now!" the team leader screamed over the comms. She looked through the scope. The distance was extreme, 1,030 meters, nearly 2 kilometers. She saw the muzzle flashes first, tiny, angry pinpricks in the dust cloud thrown up by the enemy's DSHK heavy machine gun, a Soviet-era beast firing armor-piercing rounds. The machine gun position was static, entrenched behind a crumbling stone wall. It was ripping the recon team's cover apart. Volkov did not aim for the man. She aimed for the machine gun. Correction factor for the Barrett, 1.9 mils left for Coriolis, plus 0.6 mils up for drop, adjusting for the 15-knot crosswind. She exhaled slowly, pulling the trigger. The sound was less a crack and more a physical concussion, a shockwave that slammed into her chest. The muzzle brake violently vented gas, kicking up a plume of dust in front of the rifle. A half-second of silence followed. Then, through the scope, she watched the incredible physics unfold. The 50 caliber incendiary round, traveling at supersonic speeds, impacted the steel receiver of the DSHK. The impact was catastrophic. The round didn't just penetrate, it vaporized the receiver block and ignited the ammunition belt, causing a chain reaction explosion. "Hit! Machine gun is down! Excellent shot, Volkov!" The brief relief was instantly swallowed by renewed terror. As the 6-man team tried to maneuver, a second element, previously hidden, opened up with AK fire and, more dangerously, 40mm grenades from an underbarrel launcher. Volkov shifted target acquisition. She needed to disrupt their coordination. She saw 2 insurgents moving aggressively toward the pinned team's flank, maneuvering behind the skeletal remains of an overturned vehicle. They were too close to the friendly position for high-explosive mortar support, and the angles were too steep for the close air support that was still minutes away. The insurgents carried what looked like a wounded comrade. Volkov hesitated for a fraction of a second. The tactical dilemma was stark. The immediate threat to 4 friendly lives versus the ethics of engaging non-combatants, even if they were being used as cover. Then she saw the movement. The wounded comrade was not bleeding. He was carrying an anti-tank rocket launcher, perfectly concealed under a blanket. They were setting up to destroy the recon team's single armored transport. No time for philosophical debate. Volkov made the call that would haunt her nightmares for years. She squeezed the trigger twice more, rapidly cycling the heavy bolt between shots. The second shot struck the cover vehicle's engine block, turning it into instant shrapnel. The blast radius and fragmentation scattered the 3 insurgents. The third shot, aimed carefully, hit the man carrying the RPG launcher just as he was attempting to stand, detonating the volatile warhead before he could fire. 3 lives neutralized, 4 friendly lives saved. The firefight immediately broke, the remaining insurgents scattering, overwhelmed by the sudden, precise, long-range violence. The radio silence that followed was terrifying. Volkov stayed on the roof for another 30 minutes, providing security until the quick reaction force arrived. When she finally descended, the scent of gunpowder and burnt metal clinging to her, she didn't feel triumph. She felt only a paralyzing, icy exhaustion. She had executed a kill chain flawlessly, but the sheer distance and the calculated nature of the destruction made it feel less like self-defense and more like an act of divine, detached judgment. In the debriefing tent the next day, her commanding officer, Colonel Davies, looked at her with an expression Volkov couldn't decipher, a mixture of awe, pity, and professional calculation. "Corporal Volkov," Davies said, placing a thick file on the table. "You engaged at 1,930 meters. You destroyed a DSHK position, and you neutralized 2 hostile elements who were maneuvering to launch an anti-armor rocket. You did this using a weapon system outside your primary specialization, under intense pressure, with absolute precision. You saved 4 lives, Volkov. Undeniably, 4 men are alive today because you compensated for the rotational velocity of the Earth." He paused, running a hand over his face. "The brass is calling it tactical brilliance. They are recommending you for the highest recognition for valor." Volkov stared blankly at the map on the wall. "Sir, one of the targets. He was holding an RPG. I had to use lethal force to prevent the launch. You did your job, Corporal. You did exactly what we train you to do. You minimized collateral risk and prioritized the survival of your own team. Case closed. But for Volkov, the case was never closed. The weight of the deaths, however necessary, settled on her. She had been trained to heal, to stop the bleed, to apply the tourniquet. Now, she was recognized for being the decisive force that caused the injury. The dichotomy was tearing her apart. When the Valor Medal arrived, it was presented in a subdued private ceremony at the FOB. Volkov accepted it with rigid formality, but the heavy bronze disc felt like a brand of shame. Within weeks, the psychological impact became insurmountable. The hypervigilance, the recurring nightmares of the scope reticle settling over human shapes, the constant tremor in her hands, the tremor that made it impossible to place a fine suture or start an IV line accurately. She was diagnosed with severe operational stress injury. The Army couldn't officially fire a decorated war hero, but they could reassign her. They needed her out of the combat zone, out of the spotlight, somewhere she could perform a necessary non-critical function. Her medical skills were deemed unusable. Her sniper skills, too dangerous for her current psychological profile. She was reassigned to Base Support Operations, BSO, back in the States, specifically to maintenance and custodial services. It was the ultimate irony. The woman who saved lives at 2 kilometers was now responsible for polishing linoleum at close range. She was told officially that this was a period of rest and recovery. Unofficially, she was told to disappear. She kept the medal locked away, refusing to wear the ribbon. She shed the designation of Corporal Volkov, the sharpshooter. She became Volkov, the quiet cleaner. It was easier that way. It allowed her to function in the sterile, predictable world of mop buckets and chemical inventory, far from the chaotic unpredictability of life and death. Back in the fluorescent-lit supply depot, the echo of Sergeant Sterling's voice brought her crashing back to the present. Too sensitive for the real fight. The phrase hung in the air, a poisonous gas. Sterling, who had never seen combat outside of an administrative audit, was judging her worth based on her current proximity to a mop. He saw the dirty uniform and assumed incompetence. "Sergeant Sterling," Volkov said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with a dangerous, crystalline clarity. "I understand the constraints of the budget. I will attempt to source the required chemicals from outside the standard requisition channels." She picked up the inferior gallon jug of standard floor cleaner, ready to endure the rest of her shift. Sterling smiled, a thin, smug curve of the mouth. "That's what I like to hear, Volkov. Initiative. See, the problem with you frontline types is you think everything is about adrenaline and bullets. It's about paperwork and budgets. You need to learn how to operate in the system, not against it." He tapped the requisition form with an ink pen, looking at his watch again. "Now, get those halls scrubbed. I have Colonel Davies arriving in 40 minutes for an inspection, and I don't want him tracking mud into my sterile environment." The mention of Colonel Davies, the officer who had witnessed her collapse and arranged her transfer, caused a brief, internal flinch. But before Volkov could process the name, the atmosphere of the supply depot changed. It wasn't a noise. It was the sudden, oppressive silence of the outside world being pushed back by an unnatural level of authority. The automatic doors of the depot hissed open. In walked a figure that instantly redefined the concept of military bearing. He was tall, moving with the quiet, predatory grace of an animal that had never known fear. His uniform, dark, almost black utilities, was devoid of rank insignia visible at a distance, bearing only the subdued, angular patch of a unit few knew existed outside of classified briefings. Task Force 88, a multinational joint counterterrorism unit composed of the world's most capable operators. A SEALs and GROM hybrid, deployed globally, known only by their mission call signs. This man's presence was magnetic. He wasn't loud, but every other sound in the room seemed to attenuate in his proximity. He was accompanied by two other silent figures, equally imposing, scanning the room not with curiosity, but with calculated threat assessment. The lead operator, whose scarred face looked like it was carved from granite, wore a non-standardized baseball cap, shadowing his eyes. Volkov recognized the intense 1,000-yard stare immediately. She had shared that stare in the moments between the fighting and the quiet despair. Sergeant Sterling, instantly recognizing that he was in the presence of someone far above his administrative pay grade, leaped clumsily to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "Sir, Sergeant Sterling, Supply Command. How can I assist Task Force 88? We weren't expecting." The operator didn't acknowledge Sterling. His gaze, ice blue and utterly dismissive, swept past the supply sergeant as if he were furniture. The operator was moving toward the back requisition window, but as he moved, his eyes settled on Corporal Volkov, who was frozen by the door, the mop handle still in her hand. Volkov instinctively lowered her head slightly, attempting to become even smaller. Operators like this didn't deal with maintenance staff. They dealt with high-value targets and strategic objectives. The operator stopped directly in front of her. His two accompanying team members stopped exactly 3 paces behind him, flanking him perfectly. The silence returned, thicker this time, heavy with unspoken power. Sterling, desperate to recover his authority, nervously attempted to bridge the gap. "Sir, I apologize for the appearance of the hallway. This is just Corporal Volkov. She's responsible for maintenance. I was just instructing her on—" "Shut up, Sergeant." The voice of the operator was deep, resonant, and clipped, an instrument tuned for command authority. It was not a request. Sterling instantly snapped his mouth shut, paling dramatically. The operator focused entirely on Volkov. He looked at the oil smudge on her cheek, the faded rank, the mop. Then, slowly, methodically, he reached out a hand and took the mop from her grasp. He placed the simple, utilitarian tool gently against the wall. He then reached into his tactical vest. Volkov stiffened, her trauma instantly translating the movement into threat assessment. But he wasn't reaching for a sidearm. He pulled out a small, laminated plastic card, her military ID, which she had presented to Sterling minutes earlier. Sterling, in his arrogant dismissal, had tossed it onto his desk. The operator must have picked it up silently on his approach. The operator, Ghost 6, flipped the ID card and read the back, where a short summary of her service record was printed for quick verification. He ignored her name and current rank. He read the citations. He spoke, not raising his voice, but projecting it so that every word filled the suddenly vast space of the depot. "Corporal Anya Volkov." He paused, holding the card up slightly, his eyes still fixed on her. Awarded the Soldier's Medal for distinguishing herself by heroism, not involving direct conflict with an enemy. January 2021. For actions taken during the catastrophic fuel depot breach at Fort Bragg, providing emergency trauma care while exposed to high-grade chemical fumes, stabilizing 3 personnel with severe inhalation injury, and preventing their deaths. You were reassigned for refusing medical attention until all 3 were stabilized. Sterling blinked, his face turning gray. He hadn't read the back of the card. No one in BSO had bothered to read the full record of The Quiet Cleaner. Ghost 6 continued, his voice lowering, adding layers of gravitas. Awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, August 2022, FOB Chapman, Afghanistan. The name of the forward operating base, the symbol of Volkov's hidden torment, echoed through the quiet depot. Citation reads, for exceptional valor and extreme competence while providing long-range suppressive fire from an overwatch position, successfully engaging and neutralizing multiple enemy elements at distances exceeding 1,100 meters, utilizing the M107A1 anti-materiel rifle, preventing the destruction of an armored transport, and the imminent deaths of 4 attached reconnaissance personnel who were pinned down by heavy enemy fire. Corporal Volkov demonstrated surgical precision under intense psychological duress, ensuring the survival of her comrades by executing difficult fire solutions requiring complex atmospheric and kinetic calculations, including mandatory adjustments for the Coriolis effect. The Silver Star, one of the highest combat decorations America offers. She hadn't just saved lives. She had done so by performing an act of unbelievable detached mastery, an act of calculated violence few professional snipers could replicate. Sergeant Sterling's knees began to visibly buckle. The help he had just insulted, the sensitive nurse he had mocked for being fired, was a hero of immense, proven, lethal capability. A hero who chose to hide her honor behind a mop bucket. Ghost 6 finally lowered the ID card. He didn't offer praise or sympathy. He offered recognition. When command needed a medic, you were there. When they needed a sniper, you were there. You did what was necessary, Corporal. He then performed the most profound act of respect any combat soldier can offer a comrade. He reached down and unslung his primary weapon. It was an HK-416 assault rifle, the weapon of choice for the world's most demanding special operations units. It was sleek, compact, and utterly businesslike. Volkov could see the signs of its history. The minor scratches on the magazine well, the faint scent of spent gunpowder and high-grade CLP lubricant. It was an extension of the man, a sacred tool of their trade. Ghost 6 held the HK-416 out, muzzle up, safety engaged, grip toward Volkov. Take this, Corporal, he ordered, his eyes demanding obedience, not subservience. Hold it. Volkov's hands, which had been trembling minutely since the flashback began, grew still. She reached out and accepted the weapon. The weight of the HK-416 was immediate and familiar, a solid, comfortable presence in her hands. It was the weight of responsibility, the weight of the fight she had tried so hard to forget. The rifle felt cold, yet strangely warm, a testament to its recent use. This was not a gesture of passing a burden. It was an acknowledgement of shared burden. In the silent language of the warrior elite, handing over your primary weapon, your lifeline, your most sacred possession, was the ultimate declaration. I trust you with my life. We are the same. Volkov looked down at the rifle, then back up at Ghost 6. The granite face offered a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod. You earned the right to touch this more than anyone in this building, Corporal, Ghost 6 said, the statement aimed squarely at the trembling figure of Sergeant Sterling. Sterling was a ruined man. His face was pure white, his starched collar suddenly too tight. He had belittled a Silver Star recipient over floor soap. He understood, with chilling finality, that his career, his reputation, and every scrap of petty authority he cherished had just evaporated. Ghost 6 turned back to his team. We have what we need. Let's go. He gave Volkov one final, long look, the meaning clear. Your secret is safe, but your honor is recognized. He took the HK-416 back, his movements economical, and slung it across his chest. As the Task Force 88 team turned to leave, the automatic doors hissed open once more. And that's when the new arrival appeared, Colonel Davies, Volkov's former commander from FOB Chapman, looking older but instantly recognizing the posture and the silent recognition between Volkov and the elite operators. Davies stopped, spotting Sterling, pale, shaking, looking utterly defeated. And then Volkov, standing tall now, dignity restored. He looked at the departing Task Force 88 operators, then back at Volkov. He understood everything immediately. Davies walked directly to Volkov, ignoring Sterling completely. "Anya," he said, using her first name, a sign of respect he hadn't used since the debriefing tent. "I'm glad I caught you. I apologize for the delay in processing the transfer request. You should have been out of here months ago." Volkov looked up, confused. "Sir? Your transfer, Corporal. To the 10th Mountain Division, Fort Drum. They need a highly decorated, highly skilled trauma specialist for their mountain rescue teams. It's operational, but far removed from the previous theater. You were worried about the tremors, right? High-altitude rescue, fast rope insertions, less stress on fine motor skills." He offered a rare, genuine smile. "And regarding your current employment status, Volkov, no one fired the quiet nurse. You stepped back, and we protected your space until you were ready to step forward again. And you are needed. Now, your gear is packed. Your helicopter is arriving." The sound arrived before the sight, the rhythmic, heavy thudding of rotary blades. A Navy MH-60 Seahawk, clearly marked for rapid transport of high-value personnel, was settling onto the landing pad just outside the depot walls, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and debris. Volkov looked at the colonel, then at the empty space where the elite operators had stood, and finally, at Sergeant Sterling, who was leaning against the wall, trying not to vomit. She picked up her mop. "I still have to clean the floor before I leave, sir," she stated simply. Davies chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Corporal, you don't. Not anymore." He put a hand on her shoulder. "Go on. Your war is over. Your mission is beginning." Volkov walked out of the depot and into the deafening rush of the rotor wash, the sound drowning out everything, cleansing the air of the stale scent of petty bureaucracy and arrogant judgment. As she climbed aboard the helicopter, leaving the dirty mop and the defeated sergeant behind, she looked down. The drab uniform didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.